Welcome back to Public Speaking at Motlow College. Today we're in Chapter 3, starting on page 38. If you haven't watched this TED video, please go do so. If this picture looks familiar, then you've probably seen it. Just a short 5-minute video just talking about physically what happens in our bodies and why. Thought it was a really informative video, and I'll build on that today in our curriculum. So today we'll be talking about nervousness, or stage fright as we call it in the theater world. I once had a wart on the bottom of my foot. It's a plantar wart, and it was pretty big before I realized it was even there. Gross, I know. And I went to the drugstore, and I saw an entire shelf full of wart medications. So I thought, okay, look at all of these solutions. Surely we'll be able to fix this. So I got a little wart burner kit where you could try to burn the wart off. So I did that, and it grew right back. I tried these little pads that you put on your foot and with a Band-Aid over it, and kept applying that. I tried home remedies with apple cider vinegar, tried duct taping it, all of these things. And what I came to realize is that there are so many ways to treat warts because no one wart medication really works. Does that make sense? So if there was a wart medication that actually 100% got rid of the wart, we wouldn't need an entire shelf full of solutions. And today I'm going to go over an entire shelf full of solutions for accepting your nervousness and calming your nerves when you speak. And I wish that I could just give you a magic potion. I wish there was one thing that I could say that was going to 100% get rid of your nervousness and anxiety with public speaking. But the truth is, nervousness is normal. Nervousness is healthy. I still experience nervousness for sure. So I hope that today I'll give you some real medicines that really will help and make your anxiety more manageable. That's my goal. But I don't want to go into this talk with any sense of false certainty. This is not a quick fix. This is not easy. You have to have courage to speak publicly, and that's just the truth of it. So I'm sure you've gotten to this point in your academic career by stepping out and taking risks and being a person who is willing to try. So we'll talk today about how to manage your stage fright. So on the right there, you can see some of the bodily symptoms. Which symptoms do you have? And the reason that I want you to really think about that is so that you can kind of prepare before you go in. As I said in the video, John Lennon always threw up before he gave a performance, a concert. So if you know that about yourself, that nausea is one of your side effects, maybe you don't go eat a big Mexican food meal before you come in to give a speech. If you know that you are going to tremble, you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of props in your hands that'll noticeably jiggle as you try to present. So those are just some things to think about. You know, how can I be aware of what my body's going to do when it's nervous? And how can I begin to combat that with my behavior? Now, there's some things that there's nothing you can do about it. You're going to sweat if you're going to sweat. Maybe you don't wear a pastel shirt, but you know, in general, you can't will your sweat glands to stop sweating. It's just gonna unfortunately be there. So one of the worst things that you can do when you start to feel your legs, for example, get shaky is to then try to control your nervousness, to try to lock your legs into place, because some of you may know physically, if you lock your legs and lean back, you can actually pass out. But the same is true in other parts of your body. If you start to feel your voice shake and you tense up your voice and you create a lot of tension in your throat, that can actually cause more damage. So when you feel these symptoms start to come on, one of the best things that you can do is what I call ride the wave. Accept them. Just know that that's what happens to your body, and that's okay. If you start to feel some butterflies, acknowledge them with your mind and say, I've got butterflies right now. That's a normal reaction to nervousness, and let it be, in the words of John Lennon again there, or Mother Mary, depending on your perspective. So whatever your body's doing, it is a normal reaction. And it's probably not as noticeable to us as it may be to you. In some semesters, I'll videotape my students, and I can't believe how many of them in their critique of themselves write, I'm so glad you couldn't see my knees shaking. My knees were shaking the entire time, but you can't tell on the video. And, I make a note to write on their paper, well, we never saw your knees shaking. That's something that only you can feel. So a lot of these side effects may be less obvious. Now, of course, something like shortness of breath. This is one that I've had, especially during my pregnancy, a shortness of breath. So what do? Well, when you come up to the front of the podium, when you come to the front of the class, just take a moment to look at the audience and make an intentional move to take some deep breaths to get away from that shallow breathing. And like I said, some of these are physiological. Some of you have disabilities or something else that, you're working against on top of that. But remember, I'm not asking you to be a perfect performer. These are just ways that you can start to think about minimizing your symptoms. So one way that you can sort of accept and ride the wave of this is to acknowledge that adrenaline coursing through your body is energy that you can channel. One of the worst ways to be a presenter is to be unengaging or boring. And remember that when you have that shot of adrenaline, it's going to light up your eyes, it's going to excite your voice, it's going to make you dynamic and engaging. And on some level, you'll have an energy, an intangible energy, that we as an audience will be engaged to. So don't think of that energy as something necessarily negative. In the public speaking world, we call that eustress. eustress, not distress, but eustress. If you can channel it into positive thinking, which we'll talk about more in this lecture, then it can create a more positive experience in your mind. So, what can we do with our body when we start to feel all this nervousness, when we start to get breathless, when we start to get on pins and needles or our stomach starts to turn? There are some exercises that you can do. Some of them are and all of these should be done before you speak. So please don't, as you're speaking, be stretching or doing any of these things. This is something you want to do maybe before you come to class, or I've had some people do them in the hall. Most people aren't offended by that when they're walking around. You may look a little silly. Some people go to the bathroom, stretch in the handicap stall, as it were. But these are all things that you want to do before you speak to help your body sort of fight against this nervousness. So this picture here is the one that they talked about in the TED Talk that you watched before you started. And there's, as he talks about the hypothalamus and reaching up and thinking about breathing into your groin. As weird as that may sound, those of you who've done yoga before, you know the hip flexors and how important that area of the body is for relaxation. So think about deep breathing so deeply that you're breathing all the way into your groin. And that stretch will help relax your body. And getting your arms up above your head gets your blood flowing in a healthy way. Exercise. If you're a runner, go run out some of those nervous energies before you come into class. Yoga is something that I've found particularly centering and calming. Even if you don't have time to do a 45-minute set, maybe just do a few sun salutations before you come to class, just to sort of center your heart and your mind. Deep breathing. This is a really easy one on the day that you're coming in to speak, maybe in the car, in the shower. Just think about taking deep breaths in, maybe hold your breath for a few seconds, and then deep breaths out. Now be careful when you're doing your deep breathing that you don't lift your shoulders. That can be something really tempting because we hold a lot of tension, most of us do, in our shoulders. Once again, that's something I talked about in the TED Talk. It's a natural reaction to want to slump your shoulders over and get into a defensive stance. Think about rolling your shoulders back, keeping your shoulders relaxed, and let your belly breathe in and out and in and out. This is a good time to mention too that if you know that anxiety is something that's really going to hit you hard on the day of your speech, try to wear comfortable clothes. Don't wear anything that's a little too tight around your stomach. Don't wear anything that's maybe a little bit itchy, because the more soft, the more comfortable your clothes are, the more relaxed you'll be able to get. We don't want any extra irritants. And speaking of your epidermis, another really great thing that you can do is skin-to-skin contact. Whether it be a hug from a friend or maybe it's to yourself. So if you like to pop your knuckles or play with your hair, that's actually a pretty natural reaction. Those are self-soothing mechanisms. So don't make yourself stop fidgeting. Once you get in front of the class, I want you to stop fidgeting. But if you're in your seat and you feel like you want to scratch your head or pop your knuckles or some sort of self-soothing, then that is normal and healthy. So if nothing else, just take a big deep breath and a nice stretch at your seat before you get up to speak, just to make sure that your blood is flowing and that you are physically ready to do your work. So I created a tribute speech outline example that you have a copy of. If you haven't taken a look at that, I would encourage you to do that. It's about self-talk. Now, self-talk is something that is kind of an emerging idea, kind of based on, you may have heard mantras, but how you talk to yourself is very important. And most of us talk to ourselves at some time, some of us more than others, but how you talk to yourself is very important. It can help you, self-talk can help you to focus. It can help you to be more productive and rational. It can help you to stay on task and regulate your emotions. So instead of saying something like, I'm going to bomb this speech today, if instead on the way to the speech you say, Emily, you've practiced this speech. Emily, you've done this before. Emily, you are confident and you can do this. Now, you might feel a little cheesy, but that sort of encouraging self-talk has really proven in sports situations, in sales. It's been studied, and look at the evidence that I provide in that tribute speech outline example. It really can improve your performance. So feeling a little crazy in the moments before you give your speech is a small price to pay, I think, for disciplining your mind and learning how to be kind to yourself in a way that's productive. So if you haven't taken a look at that self-talk, I'd really encourage you to do that. So here's some self-talk that I recommend for you the day of your speech, some things to say to yourself. So he talks about in the initial 5-minute talk that I, asked you to watch in that TED Talk, to create some perspective. What can happen in our minds is that we really blow it out of proportion, how big of a deal a speech can be. And if you start to think rationally and really ask yourself, so what? You may make a fool of yourself, but some people will make fools of themselves during speech class. It's going to happen. So just putting it into perspective, so what? Obviously, if you have not practiced the speech at all, if you've never given the speech in front of another human being, in front of your dog, in front of your steering wheel, in front of your shower head, then you probably should be nervous. But for those of you who've done your hard work, you're ready to go, then just tell yourself, I'm going to do what you rehearsed. You've practiced this. Your mom says it's great. Your boyfriend says it's great. That friend who owes you a favor said it was a great speech. You can do this. I'm just going to do what I've been practicing. And there's some great things that your body will do there to help you out. There's something called muscle memory. And this is the reason if you played a sport that your coach probably had you run those plays over and over again so that you could get them into your body. Those of you who are dancers, you know this really well too, because after you rehearse a dance so many times, it just gets into your body and becomes part of your muscle memory. So that's a really nice gift that your body gives you. So I've had some people, once again, come to me after a speech and say, I was just completely checked out the entire time I was giving my speech. I can't believe I got through it. And not that that's ideal, but it is one way that your body copes. And, often I'm surprised by that comment. I didn't even know that they emotionally checked out because their body had practiced it so many times that it went into muscle memory and took over for them. Some of you, when you drove to Motlow this morning, maybe you didn't have to think about turning left at the light because you've done it so many times that your muscle memory took over. So that's just another reason to practice, 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 and do what you rehearsed. This is kind of the wisdom of pretending that everybody in the room is naked. If you've ever heard somebody say that to you before, oh, you just won't be nervous if you pretend the audience is naked. And sometimes we can be intimidated by an audience. Sometimes it's one person in particular. Maybe it's an ex-boyfriend or someone who makes you nervous for one reason or another. But if you can remember that the people in the audience want you to do well, this isn't a class where you'll be punished because someone else does better than you do. Everybody can earn an A if they work for it. So just think the people in this room are people that I've had conversations with, I've worked in small groups with. They want me to do well. They're encouraging me. They're my cheerleaders. I definitely want you to do well because it looks great on me when you do well, for one thing. So just remember, we're on your side. Don't think of us as these predators. Think of us as fellow sojourners. We're part of your journey. I know this sounds bad too, but sometimes your biggest sense of putting things into perspective is this will be over in an hour. I will have done this speech and I can go home and have a cookie, right? For some of you who are really achievement oriented, remember that a speech is only part of your grade. You have many, many speeches, many opportunities, written assignments. So if you're worried about bombing for the sake of your grade, just remember this class is more like a marathon than a sprint. You're not going to completely bomb your grade in one assignment. So now, one of the best ways for you to get away from that sense of self-consciousness, oh, do I have something in my teeth? Oh, is everybody staring and their eyes are on me? Is to think about your message. And I have a picture of Mother Teresa here because she is someone who had a powerful message and said very brave things in public places and spoke up as a woman and as a person of conviction. So try not to focus on your own insecurities. Try not to worry about how your hair looks or your own clothes. Instead, think about your message, the importance of your message, and then maybe relaying that message to the audience. Like we talked about in chapter 1, you want to be watching for feedback. Are they making eye contact with you? Are they tuning out? Are they nodding their head in agreement? Right? Take that affirmation, run with it. Focus on your audience and not on yourself. Because a lot of the nervousness, a lot of the anxiety may come from a self-involvement that's not healthy. So really think about engaging your audience. Make it about your message and about the people in the room, not about your own insecurities. Some of you are perfectionists. You want things to go exactly the way that you planned. You want things to be perfect. And in art, we say if you have 60% of what you imagine to be true, then you're succeeding. We in our minds can imagine this perfect scenario and where every word comes out right and every slide looks exactly how we wanted it to look. But sometimes you make it on a Mac and then you take it to a PC and the picture's not there. And so instead of stopping your presentation and quitting and sitting down and saying, never mind, I just forget the whole thing, try to just roll with it It may not affect your grade that much. It may not be that big of a deal. So just because something goes wrong doesn't mean that you should throw out the baby with the bathwater, as it were. Such a senseless reaction, and it can particularly happen with type A's or perfectionists. This is a Dave Grohl. He's the lead singer for the Foo Fighters. It's not about being perfect. It's not about sounding absolutely correct. It's not about what goes into a computer. It's about what goes on in your heart and in your head. And I would much rather hear a sort of stammering speech full of conviction and well thought than a perfectly polished, thin or narrow or a simplistic speech. So just because something comes out as polished and clean and poised doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best speech. Like we talked about in the first day, made to stick. It may not be as engaging. It may not be as memorable. Just because it's polished doesn't make it a great speech. Don't think about being perfect. Think about your message and bringing us a message that matters. So, this George Clooney picture here. Another reason why it's just not going to be perfect is because you're dealing with synchronous communication. This can be kind of the allure of social media. A lot of people can sound clever on Twitter when they've had time to think it through, on Facebook when they've had time to organize a response to someone else's comment. It's much harder in natural communication to respond in time or synchronously versus asynchronously. If you have to think on your feet, if you have to think extempore or impromptu, it can be much more difficult. So just be aware of that. Be aware of the medium that you're dealing with. Public speaking is a synchronous communication. It's not going to be as polished as an essay when you had time to write it and put it down and edit it. There is no editing in public speaking when you're in front of the class. So here's what I encourage you to do. Think about an outline for your speech. Think about what events happen. So for your first speech, for the humorous anecdote, think about, okay, for my humorous anecdote, for example, right? First we went canoeing. Then my dad tied the kid canoe to the grown-up canoe. Then we flipped. Then my jellies floated down the river. And then I ran into Grandma. So I memorized those 5 events, and maybe I think about them on my 5 fingers. And so I tell my story having memorized the outline of my speech. Now I'll have certain phrases that I know I want to use. I'll have certain words that I've been intentional about picking out, but I'm going to keep my story natural. I'm going to keep my voice conversational. I'm going to engage my audience. If I see people are familiar with canoes, maybe I move a little faster. If I see a lot of confused look, I realize I don't have a lot of outdoorsy people in the room, then maybe I need to go back and say, canoes are shaped like this. Maybe I draw it on the board, right? So I take my time and speak extemporaneously. Now for the longer speeches, you still need to memorize your outline. Maybe you're going over the pros and the cons of drilling for oil in the United States and exporting oil, for example. Maybe we're going to export oil internationally. So maybe I have 3 pros and 3 cons. I will have memorized my introduction, my 3 pros and my 3 cons. I'll know what examples are going where. Maybe I have them on my note card. But once again, if I see people starting to tune out, maybe I throw in a joke. If I see that I'm running out of time, maybe I skip over one of my cons. You have to stay flexible. And that will open you up to, once again, letting go of that perfection, letting go of what you planned, and just being in the moment, connecting to your audience, and trying to make the best of any given speech. Please, please, please. One of the worst things when I see people freeze up and have to sit down because they can't remember what came next, it's often because they were trying to do a declamation. They wrote out their speech word for word, memorized it, and now they're trying to share it with a class that way. It often comes off as didactic. It often comes off as unengaged and disinterested. It's harder for you to make eye contact because you're picturing the words that you memorized, maybe on the ceiling or on the back wall, is just not as engaging. So please, please, please do not sit down and write out your speech word for word. And people always ask me that, do I have to turn in a copy of my speech written out word for word? No, please don't, because I don't want you to get that married to your script, that attached to your plan. Remember, we're speaking extemporaneous. We have a plan, but we're willing to let go of parts of it or change parts of it in any given situation. So keep the tone of your conversation light, not necessarily light, sorry, that's not the right word to say. Keep your tone conversational, right? You're looking at us, you're engaging in us. And one of the best ways to think about that is think about giving special parts of your speech to different people in the room. Just think about having a conversation and trying to connect with them. When I say didactic, I mean not too formal, not like you're reading. There's a time and a place for that, but not in my class. There may be times in your life when you need to give a very formal speech, but that's not for public speaking class. We also want to avoid singing our speech. Maybe we've practiced it lots of times, and so we start getting into this sing-songy tone. So please try to avoid that. If you practice, once again, too much, you can create these unnatural vocal rhythms. The best thing to do for that is to try to connect directly to your audience. Try to avoid jargon. Try to avoid jargon, any unclear language. So one of my military people, sometimes you like to use acronyms and assume that we know what your acronyms mean. We may not. I don't know anything about football, as I said before. So if it's a linebacker, I need to know, what does he do? Take the time to break it down for us. But we also want to avoid vague generalities, right? We want to avoid just talking blandly about non-specifics. It's not helpful, and it doesn't really engage your audience. So make those words, and we talked about this a little bit when we talked about creating your humorous anecdotes, but make it vivid, make it engaging. Try to avoid being boring. So in general, most of you will talk too quietly. That's the biggest complaint that I have on your first speech. Make sure that you're talking louder than you think you need to talk, because we're sitting all the way in the back of the room, and you're not used to talking that loud. If you're talking too loud, I'll tell you. So most of you need to speak louder than you think you need to talk. Although I have to say, this is one problem that I don't have. I am actually tend to talk too loud. In vocal coaching, we call that pushing. When I get nervous, I tend to yell at my audience. So anytime I'm doing that in class, feel free to tell me, Miss Seal, get quiet or you're talking too loud. So as always, as you've heard me say before, use clear, resonant, and dulcet tones. Resonant meaning that it has those nice vibrations, those yummy vibrations, that you are filling up the space not by pushing or yelling at us, but through your sense of resonant sound. And dulcet just means musical. Don't be afraid to change your pitches and speak in a way that's pleasant for us to hear. Try not to speak too fast. This is something particularly that my ladies are guilty of. Remember, women in general talk a little faster than men. So just make sure you're taking your time, talk a little louder than you think you need to speak, and talk a little more slowly. So remember, you're looking for feedback. You're making eye contact with them. We're not just looking at our note cards or staring back at the screen behind us. We're going to face our audience and connect with them as much as we can through eye contact. So this is something when people get nervous, they don't know what to do with their hands. And the best thing that I can tell you is to try not to think about it, although I've just brought it up, so now you're thinking about it. Avoid folding your hands behind your back. That is the most distancing body language. So unless you're disciplining us or you want us to feel estranged from you, please don't put your hands behind your back. If you don't know what to do with your hands, you can always fold them at your belly button height or hold your note cards at your belly button height. That will keep your arms up and free to use them if you want, but not necessarily unnatural. So if you also want to avoid what we call holding grapefruits, your palms up and just kind of flapping your arms around, that's very unnatural. But if you're not sure what to do with your hands, you can think about incorporating props or handing out worksheets as you speak, but always move with intention. Try to avoid fidgeting too much. Try to avoid pacing back and forth. That can be very distracting. But if you have a few hand gestures, that's probably not going to distract your audience. For your first speech, it's only 2 to 4 minutes. I wouldn't move throughout the space at all. I would just stand in one spot the whole time that you're giving your speech. We'll talk more about this in chapter 13. When we get into the longer speeches, I'll expect you to move more intentionally. But as I said, for this first speech, it's all right if you don't move at all. All right, well, that is the end of my speech on nervousness. Like I said, there is no easy fix. You're going to have to be courageous. You're going to have to stand up and share. I hope that you will have done everything that you can do to minimize the side effects of nervousness. Prepare your body, prepare your mind, talk to yourself in a way that is kind and empowering. Be ready to deliver your speech, having practiced and practiced and practiced so that your muscle memory can take over if need be. Try to connect with us as an audience through good eye contact and a conversational tone. As always, thank you for listening.